Having begun this research in October 2022, I'm delighted to now share the Environmental Impact of Filmmaking Project with you all. I'm Dr. Rebecca Harrison, Project Lead and Senior Lecturer in Film and Media. Joining me are Dr. Siti Syuhaida Mohamed Yunus, the project's Research Associate and our Environmental Science Genius, and Min Kim, who are extremely knowledgeable data analyst at BAFTA Albert.
Becca and I are based at the Open University, and our work is funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. Our partners are BAFTA Albert, which is providing data analysis and comm support, and the National Science and Media Museum, which is hosting events for us next year.
Hi, I'm Min. I'm the data analyst for Albert, and I've been working alongside Becca and Sue during the whole project, assisting with the data collection and gathering. It's been really insightful to see the different environmental impacts of different ways of filmmaking. So it's been great to work with you guys. And Albert, just for context, the leading environmental organisation for the screen industry. And we've recently had a partnership with the BFI spanning 3 years, looking at sustainable screen and how we can encourage filmmakers to become more sustainable. So lovely to be here.
Thank you. Also, there's some seats down here if anyone wants to grab one. So the Environmental Impact of Filmmaking Project aims to support sustainable film and television production by bringing together researchers and practitioners who are exploring the environmental impact of props and costumes made for the Star Wars franchise. The project emerged from a broader interest of mine in under-researched aspects of Star Wars. The franchise is also well suited to our investigation, owing to the ubiquity of its design and just how popular it is in the public consciousness and imagination. Together, we're exploring the histories of different materials, fabrication techniques, and the afterlives of 4 different assets, which are practical and digital versions of Artoo Detoo, the throne room dress, lightsabers, and animatronic puppet Baby Yoda, because we thought we'd up the cute factor a bit. We're determining the likely carbon footprint of each asset to help us create a series of open access resources, including carbon emission calculator tools, which will be used by, we hope, researchers and industry creatives. So today we are focusing on our initial findings from our first case study on Artoo Detoo. And we'll also be showcasing our first associated calculator tool. So there are approximately 21 physical Artoo units made by Lucasfilm between 1976 for A New Hope and 1998 for The Phantom Menace. There are also numerous fan-built Artoos, some of which feature in films like the 2016 Rogue One. No 2 units are the same. You can spot differences in cutouts, paint placement, and movement within a single film.
So in our study, we are focusing on 2 specific droids. The first is a 1977 aluminum costume built for A New Hope. It was then reused briefly in Return of the Jedi and The Phantom Menace. The second is a 2002 CGI version of the character from Attack of the Clones. By examining these 2 units, we are aiming to test the green credentials at practical versus digital production.
So to reverse engineer the assets and better understand industry needs, I'm conducting archival research, which includes looking at things like trade magazines and data from fan droid builder clubs, interviewing practitioners who helped create the assets, and running a focus group that includes people from design to archiving roles. From interviews with practitioners, including set dresser Roger Christian, we know that after the art department created a wooden prototype and plaster moulds of Artoo Detoo on set, the aluminium build was outsourced to Pateric Engineering, a medical equipment manufacturer located near Shepperton Studios. While we can't say for sure where the aluminium sheets were sourced, they likely came from a UK-based smelter owing to government efforts in the 60s and 70s to revitalise the industry. Aside from the aluminium sheets, the Artoo costume comprised a range of bespoke and found parts, which made our calculations quite tricky. We've had to get inventive. Our measurements for the child car seat that was fitted inside the droid are based on an example from a 1980s manufacturing guide on safety standards. To estimate the amount of rubber used in Artoo wheels, I've dismantled a pair of 1970s roller skates. So our calculations are not absolutely exact, but they are as accurate as possible based on historical data. Meanwhile, former Lucasfilm archivist and Artoo controller Don Beese recalls that the production team for The Phantom Menace shipped 16 units from California to Leavesden and built a further 5 for the production. However, the Artoo unit's limited mobility and transportation requirements were recurring problems on set, which prompted a shift to digital. Chris Challoner, who worked in the art department, noted that you'd do a huge bit of realness, i.e. physical builds, and fill in any gaps with CGI. One digital shot of Artoo in The Phantom Menace became 17 in Attack of the Clones, became half of all shots of the droid in Revenge of the Sith. Based on interviews with digital animator Billy Brooks and his colleagues from the early 2000s, we have a fairly comprehensive account of Artoo's digital origins. He was built exclusively by Brooks at one workstation. Unlike other assets designed and rendered on silicon graphics machines, Brooks brought Artoo to life on a Mac using Lightwave and FormZ software. Based on their program specifications from 2001, when Attack was in production, it's probable that Brooks was using a Power Mac G4 running operating software OS X9. To complete our calculations, we've taken advice on file sizes from Nicolas Potit, a professor of 3D animation who contributed to the development of early visual effects. He estimates that 1 second of composited Artoo footage was around 300 megabytes. We've also made some quite conservative estimates about time spent on the design and animation stages of the build to underpin our calculations.
You are probably wondering how our beloved Artoo Detoo's impact on the environment could be measured. Well, buckle up as we take a dive into something called life cycle assessment, or LCA. Imagine Artoo Detoo is like a movie star, and we are watching his life story unfold in 4 stages: making, using, growing older, and saying goodbye. In my analysis, I focus on the making stage, which you can think of Artoo's birth. This thinking about how he's put together, what materials were used, and where they came from. I spent a lot of time on fan websites, pulling together the measurements that droid builders used to make their own semi-official Artoo units. I also work with data that Baker and Min provided related to the found materials like the car seat, wheels, and electronic components, and 2 digital animation processes. Once I had the probable dimensions for each materials, I calculated its weight and used the EcoInvent database to determine its carbon emission factors. Doing this work will help us suggest ways to make Artoo's journey more eco-friendly. It's like giving him a script rewrite for a better ending that's kinder to our planet.
I'd say she was great with both metaphors and maths. So after compiling all of our data, and Shu being generally a genius at pulling all the numbers together, we can share the results of our first case study with you. So if you'd like to take a look at the breakdown of our data, if you just use the QR code and go to the case study webpage, and you can download a PDF with all of the data there. So we've determined that making the 1977 Artoo likely produced 686 kilograms of carbon dioxide. The figure includes emissions related to parts, energy use from machines, and transport from factory floor to set. For the 2002 Artoo, we've accounted for machine energy use, data file sizes, and data storage from the moment of production up to the DVD release of the film. This gives the CGI droid probable emissions of 4,248 kilograms. So I had an inkling that the practical build would have a lower carbon footprint than its digital counterpart, but I was nevertheless really surprised by the huge disparity in results.
That's before we consider that the 2002 result is based on the number of seconds that the animated Artoo appears on screen, which is 1 minute 9 seconds in Attack of the Clones. To create a comparable figure for the 1977 Artoo, so we have divided the costume screen time, 10 minutes 56 seconds in A New Hope, by the total emissions for the asset. Because it's a single unit being used over and over again. When we do this, the carbon emissions per second for the 1977 Artoo decreased to 1.04 kilogram carbon dioxide.
So even when accounting for differences in energy consumption between 1976 in the UK and 2001 in the US, the practical version of Artoo probably had a lower environmental impact than the digital in terms of its carbon emissions. So I appreciate that when we're talking about amounts of carbon dioxide, it's not always tangible. So to give you a slightly more material equivalent, it would take a full-grown tree nearly 33 years to capture the carbon created by the Artoo costume, and it would take 202 years for the same tree to capture the emissions produced in making the digital.
So now we go to the calculator tool. The case study has inspired the first of 2 calculators that we are including on our website for anyone to use with an interest in props, costumes, or digital animation. The first one, the practical/digital calculator, is located on the same page as our Artoo case study. Users have 7 materials to choose from, including silicone, polyurethane foam, and cotton. So they input the number of seconds that the asset is scripted to appear on screen and the approximate weight of material needed to create it. So we have made certain assumptions about required machinery and labor time. The result offers insights into the environmental impacts of making assets practically or digitally. We will, of course, recommend anyone interested in sustainable working practices delves into the results further with a consultant who can properly assess the production's needs.
We do hope, though, that this beta phase tool encourages people to rethink their assumptions about digital practice. In our focus group and other conversations, a really noticeable gap has become apparent between how we conceive of the digital and its material impact on the environment. Phrases like green screen, cloud computing, streaming platforms, and render farm give the digital an organic, even ethereal air. as our initial results suggest, it's imperative that we work to change these misconceptions. At the very least, studios and creatives with positions of power need to work with digital animators to carefully plan and responsibly maintain assets to ensure minimal amounts of data, and thus energy, are used.
So what next? The project is funded until August 2024. So in coming month, we'll be publishing our next case study and calculator with BAFTA Albert, and completing research for our final 2 assets. Findings from all 4 case studies will appear on our website alongside educational resources such as a workshop template. People will be able to share on sets and in classrooms. We'll be testing our workshop with emerging filmmakers in Bradford next spring with our second partner, the National Science and Media Museum.
We will also be continuing to add to our website, which, alongside our own resources, compiles relevant reports, studies, and academic publications relevant to researchers and industry. We're also featuring guest blog posts from emerging scholars and artists to help share their work on this topic. In time, many of our project interviews with key Star Wars prop and costume makers will also become open access in an Open University database for future generations of researchers. Having a record of practitioners' perspectives on histories of industry sustainability will, I think, be significant in years to come. Finally, we have a series of academic publications planned, so the initial findings shared with you today will eventually appear in peer-reviewed form in journals and a book. So to wrap up then, we're hoping that the Environmental Impact of Filmmaking Project will support prop and costume makers in identifying more environmentally sustainable materials and fabrication techniques during a critical period for green initiatives in the screen industry. From digital effects to licensing IP and beyond, the project is documenting the past while working for an eco-friendlier future. We're really keen to hear from anyone who has ideas for collaboration or expanding this project, especially related to some of the biggest challenges, which, as far as I can see, is going to be about shifting from individual responsibility to collective action and encouraging studios to embed change at a corporate level. If you have any thoughts or ideas, please do take 2 or 3 minutes to complete the feedback form that's available via the QR codes that are sort of dotted around. And I'll be sending out a link to everyone via Eventbrite too, so please do get in touch with us. There's also a contact form on our website, so please don't hesitate to get in touch. And I think it's useful to say that the responses that we get from you make all the difference when we are applying for additional funding. It really does encourage funders to sort of keep supporting this kind of work. So finally, I would like to say thank you to some really important contributors. This is the closest I'm ever going to get to an Oscar speech, so you'll have to bear with me for a second. No one start playing music at the end. So thank you, of course, to our funders, the AHRC and the Open University, and partners BAFTA Albert and the National Science and Media Museum. To the research team, Shu, Min, and Mark Williams, who's doing some work on lightsabers, but he can't be with us. Obviously, the project would not be anywhere without the work that you've put into it. Thanks also to Kishan at BAFTA Albert for comm support, staff in the Open University Research Office, and the web development team at Red Giraffe, who have done, I think, a really brilliant job of creating our sustainable website. I'd also like to thank project interview and focus group participants for generously sharing their time and expertise, and our academic research network for their valuable insights throughout the process. Finally, of course, thanks to the venue team here at the BFI, our AV technicians, and the wonderful Deborah, who has done a fantastic job providing BSL. So that's everything from us, and I think we now have about 10 minutes for questions from everyone in the audience.